أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولئن أتيت الذين أوتوا الكتاب بكل آية مما تبعوا قبلتك أوتوا الكتاب بكل آية ما تبعوا قبلتك وما أنت بتابع قبلتهم وما بعضهم بتابع قبلة بعض ولئن اتبعت أهواءهم من بعد ما جاءك من العلم إنك إذا لمن الظالمين. الذين آتيناهم الكتاب يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم وإن فريقا منهم ليكتمون الحق وهم يعلمون. الحق من ربك فلا تكونن من الممترين. ولكل وجهة هو موليها فاستبقوا الخيرات أينما تكونوا يأتي بكم الله جميعا إن الله على كل شيء قدير. ومن حيث خرجت فول وجهك شطر المسجد الحرام وإنه للحق من ربك وما الله بغافل عما تعملون. ومن حيث خرجت فول وجهك شطر المسجد الحرام وحيث ما كنتم فولوا وجوهكم شطره لئلا يكون للناس عليكم حجة إلا الذين ظلموا منهم فلا تخشوهم واخشوني ولأتم نعمتي عليكم ولعلكم تهتدون. كما أرسلنا فيكم رسولا منكم يتلو عليكم آياتنا ويزكيكم ويعلمكم الكتاب والحكمة ويعلمكم ما لم تكونوا تعلمون. فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين. ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. إن الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله فمن حج البيت أو اعتمر فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف بهما، ومن تطوع خيرا فإن الله شاكر عليم. إن الذين يكتمون ما أنزلنا من البينات والهدى من بعد ما بيناه للناس في الكتاب أولئك يلعنهم الله ويلعنهم اللاعنون إلا الذين تابوا وأصلحوا وبينوا فأولئك أتوب عليهم وأنا التواب الرحيم. إن الذين كفروا وماتوا وهم كفار أولئك عليهم لعنة الله والملائكة والناس أجمعين خالدين فيها لا يخفف عنهم العذاب ولا هم ينظرون وإلهكم إله واحد لا إله إلا هو الرحمن الرحيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمات، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمات. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عسرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعسرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الله. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق يمرو، وحمده الظاهر بالكرم مجدو، الباسط بالجود يدي، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا يزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما. إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجة بي إليه عظيم، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي أتمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وعريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا، وأسألك مستأنسا لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك، فإن أبتع عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبتع عني هو خير لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور، فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فهو لي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك. كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالك الإصباح، ديان الدين، رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق، باسط الرزق، فالك الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى، وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادل، ولا شبيه يشاكل، ولا ظهير يعاضد. قهر بعزته الأعزة، وتواضع لعظمته العظمى، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصي ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازي فكم من موهبة حنيئة قد أعطاني وعزيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبحجة مونقة قد أراني فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد سائل ولا يخيب آمل الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانه وترجف الأرض وعماره وتموج البحار ومن يسبه في غمراتها الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظي سرك مبلغي رسالتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسولك وصفتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم وصل على صديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة النساء العالمين وصل على سبتي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلوات كثيرة دائما اللهم صل على اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر، وحفه بملائكتك المقربين، وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك، استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله، مكن له دينا الذي ارتديته له، عبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا، يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك، حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرعنب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم 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 المم به شعثنا، وشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكسر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغني به عائلنا، واقضي به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعتنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعتنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشفي به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واحتنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. انصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكسرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. وصل على محمد وآله، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجل، وبضر تكشف، ونصر تعز، وسلطان حق تظهر، ورحمة منك تجللنها، وعافية منك تلبسنها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات على محمد.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Tonight is the 7th night of the program with Sheikh Rizwan Arastu. Please recite a loud salawat for him. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Please recite dua shifa for all the people in the world that are going through calamities, your own family members that are going through calamities. Remember Brother Asim, Brother Taha's mom, and especially all the ones suffering in Gaza right now, all together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم. Today's program sponsors are Brother Atai and Sister Monira Atai, as well as the people of ICZ. So please, for them, please recite aloud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for all the marhumin and mu'minat around the world. For those who there is no one to recite Fatiha, then for the people on the monument of Zahra, your own marhumin and mu'minat, and especially remember tonight's sponsors, marhumin and mu'minat. Fatiha. Just a couple more announcements. Inshallah, ICZ Youth will be hosting family game night on Friday night. We welcome all of you. There will be special games for kids aged 5 to 12. Please do RSVP so we can plan accordingly. Also, tonight we are selling books written by Sheikh Rizwan Arastu. They will be on panel outside during the program and after iftar. If anybody wants to buy any books, you guys can come up to Sheikh Rizwan or me, and there will be a QR code. Also, if all the books from the panel run out today, there's a QR code for you guys to scan, and once you guys scan that, you can order online, and it will be shipped to ICZ for pickup, inshallah. With that, now I'd like to welcome Sheikh Rizwan to please bless us with a speech. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات الله محمد وآل محمد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه وأعد لهم جنات تجري تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا ذلك الفوز العظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So the 6 of you who are here have to give enough response and pay enough attention to make up for all the empty space that's here in front of us. Inshallah. We have been going through stories of various companions of Rasulullah and the Imams with the goal of trying to find role models for ourselves as we endeavor to become good followers of our own Imam. And the companion I'd like to speak about today, there are actually two of them. And it's a story that may or may not be familiar to you. I think it's also narrated by Shahi Mutahiri in his book, Companions of the Faithful, Dastan-e-Rastan. It's the story of Juwaybir and Dhalfa. Juwaybir is a muhajir who comes into Medina, and we'll see what happens between him and Dhalfa. So this story is a story about marriage, and I think it will help us to hopefully to question some of our own ideas about the marriage of our youngsters and how we find matches for them. It's narrated by Sheikh Al-Kunaini in the chapter on Al-Mu'min Kuful Mu'min, that a believer is the match of a believer. The story goes that this Juwaybir was one of many muhajirun who had come into Medina following the Prophet's hijrah to Medina. And like many of the muhajirun, he had come with the shirt on his back. He was poor, and he in particular also was selected by Allah to have quite unspectacular qualities. The things that normally makes a person attractive, especially for matchmaking. He didn't have those things. He wasn't very good looking. He was short. He was poor. He had no lineage to speak of. So he didn't have all those things that typically were marks of a good match. But he was one of the poor muhajirun who came into the masjid. And one interesting thing about the masjid of Rasulullah, Masjid Nabi, in the early days, was that when he built it, there was no roof. It was simply the walls. And the eastern wall, so the one, let's say if you're facing the mihrab of the Prophet, so the one on your left side, so your left, my right now, that wall was the eastern wall of the masjid. Now, remember that in the early days of the hijrah, the qibla was towards the north. So where the qibla is now, where the mihrab is now, it was on the opposite side. The entire masjid was 100, not 180 degrees, about 160 some degrees away from the qibla now. Now it's due south. Mecca is exactly due south from Medina. Before it was towards Baytul Maqdis, which was like 160 degrees away from that. So when they built the masjid, it was built oriented towards Baytul Maqdis. But this eastern wall, Rasulullah built it perfectly due south. And the reason was that became the shakhs, the way to tell time. Because it was facing due south, Medina is in the northern hemisphere, so the sun doesn't go directly overhead. At zawal, at dhuhr time, the shadow doesn't become zero. But it does go from shining to the west to the east. Right, the shadow's going towards the west in the morning, and then shifts over to the east as the sun goes towards to the western horizon. So at the time when that shadow faced due south, I think that's right. Yeah, faced due south, and that would be zawal. And then they could tell how long the shadow was because the wall was made exactly 7 feet high according to the feet of Rasulullah. So then if you ever wondered in fiqh books, they'll say, for instance, when the shadow reaches 2/7, then or 4/7 the fadila of dhuhr ends, and at 2/7 the fadila for asr begins. All these 2/7 and 4/7, you wonder why such an odd fraction? But the fraction was made because the wall was 7 feet high, and so then they would judge the length of the shadow, how it was elongating after zawal, to see whether asr time had started, by seeing whether 2 feet of the Prophet's feet, if the shadow had increased by 2 feet or not. That would be 2/7. So the 7s came from that wall of the masjid. When he built the masjid, the Prophet also accommodated for these homeless people, these muhajirun who were coming into Medina. So he built a place in the rear of the masjid. So again, in the early days, it would have been where the Roda is now. Because the Roda was the back of the Roda currently was the back of the masjid for the first year. When the Qibla changed and they shifted everything around, the mihrab came into the front of the masjid and everything else went to the back. So everything got reoriented. But in the early days, he built what was known as the Sufa. And so Sufa was just a pavilion, basically, kind of a maybe some supports on the side and some sort of a thatch roof, probably of palm fronds, to give some shade. Because imagine, Medina, the heat of the desert, no roof on the masjid for the first couple of years, until finally they did put a roof on part of the masjid. But in the early days, he put, for the sufa, he installed a thatched roof. And this was the place where all of these homeless companions would live. They were residents of the masjid. They would sleep there. They would do everything that they wanted to do there. And they were the permanent guests of Rasulullah. So he would take charge of providing food for them. He would bring each of them, a certain portion of dates every day, and whatever food and drink and whatever that they needed. Rasulullah took personal charge of providing that for the Ashab al-Suffah. Right? So it was kind of a rite of passage, and many of the great companions were at one time Ashab al-Suffah. Abu Dhar and Salman and Miqdad and all these people, they went through this period when they were homeless. They came into Medina as muhajirun, and they had to live like this in the masjid. Also, you are familiar that around the masjid, there were, of course, 4 walls, and the walls were permeable. They had built apartments adjacent to the masjid on 3 sides, not on the Qibla side, but on the 3 other sides. And these apartments were owned by different companions. The Prophet, of course, had his own home there. Later, when Imam Ali and Lady Fatima got married, he built a home for them right next door to him. And his other wives, Aisha and the others, as they came into Medina, he built apartments for them as well. So they were built on the eastern side, right next to that Qibla wall. And the other sides, other companions had built their own apartments, and each of them had direct access into the masjid. They had a door, a khawkha, like a small door you have to kind of duck through and come into the masjid, and they could enter into the masjid directly from their home into the masjid of Rasulullah. At one point, the command comes from Allah that we have to clear out the masjid of the Ashab al-Suffah, and we have to close off all of these doors, except for Rasulullah's door and the door of Imam Ali and Fatima al-Zahra. These 2 doors were left open, but the rest of the doors were all closed off. And part of the reason, now you know that in our ahkam for the rights of Masjid al-Nabi and Masjid al-Haram, and these 2 masjids in particular, a person can't enter into the masjid, even just to pass through the masjid, if they're in the state of either hayd or janaba. Now that goes for other masajid in some way. You can't come into a masjid. If this was a masjid, like proper masjid according to our fiqh, then a woman would not be able to come in and sit in the masjid. But those 2 masjids have an even higher sanctity, and even passing through those masajid is not permissible if you're in those states of hayd or janaba. So you can imagine if people are living in the masjid, right, these men are living there as homeless people in the sufa, then sometimes they would become junub at night, for instance, and then they would defile the masjid, and that was a problem. And so Allah wanted to purify the masjid of all of these people who are residing in the masjid. He said, find other housing for them and clear them from the masjid. Juwaybir was one of Ashab al-Suffah. During the period where the Suffah was still there, he was one of the Ashab al-Suffah. Poor, again, nothing, no claim to fame at all. No money to his name, no tribe. His looks were very compromised. Perhaps he was very short. And he didn't have any of the qualities that were there for marriage. But he was a very pious man. And Rasulullah interacted with Ashab al-Suffah regularly. They were his guests. He would sit with them. He would eat with them, invite them. And he saw very special qualities in Juwaybir. Taqwa in particular, and this eagerness to obey Allah. He approaches Juwaybir one day, and he tells him that it's time to get married, that he should think about marriage. And Juwaybir's response is, Rasulullah, look at me. Who's going to take me? I have none of the qualities that any woman would ever desire in a husband. And I don't see any possibility of marriage. Rasulullah's response to Juwaybir is, Ya Juwaybir, inna Allah qad wada'a bil islami man kana fil jahiliyati sharifa. When Islam came, it brought down those people who were at high levels in society. It brought them down because they refused to believe. So the Sharif became Wadi'. The noble person in Jahiliyyah became a nobody through Islam if they refused to become Muslim. وَشَرَّفَ بِالْإِسْلَامِ مَنْ كَانَ فِي الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ وَضِيعًا. And Islam came and took those people who were nobodies and made them into masters because they excelled in their Islam and in their obedience. وأعز بالإسلام من كان في الجاهلية ذليلا وأذهب بالإسلام ما كان من نخوة الجاهلية وتفاخرها بعشائرها وباسق أنسابها. And so Islam came and it got rid of all of those Jahili standards of pride and chauvinism, that I'm from this tribe and I'm better than that tribe and I'm more noble and my ancestors did this and my ancestors did that. All those things that people would take pride in the Jahiliyyah, Islam came and did away with those standards and replaced it with standards of character and piety and goodness. فالناس اليوم, he says, كلهم أبيضهم وأسودهم وقرشيهم وعربيهم وعجميهم من آدم. All people now, whether they are black or white, whether they are Arab or Qurashi or foreigners, all of them are from Adam. وإن آدم خلق الله من طين. And Allah created Adam from clay. وإن أحب الناس إلى الله عز وجل يوم القيامة أطوعهم له وأتقاهم. On the day of judgment, the people who will be most dear to Allah are the ones who have the greatest taqwa and who are the most obedient to Him. Then he says, وَمَا أَعْلَمُ يَا جُوَيْبِرْ لِأَحَدٍ مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ عَلَيْكَ الْيَوْمِ فَضْلًا إِلَّا لِمَنْ كَانَ أَتْقَى لِلَّهِ مِنْكَ. He says, and based on what I've just told you, I don't see anyone around here who is better than you, Juwaybir, unless he excels in taqwa and in his piety. So don't think that these deficiencies of the dunya that you perceive in yourself, that these have any bearing on your soul and on your spirit and on your character. I don't see anyone any better than you, except for the person who has more taqwa than you. So he says to Juwaybir that you need to get married. This is the best thing for you. Everyone needs to get married. And so he sends him to go to the house of this nobleman from the Ansar by the name of Ziyad ibn Labid. So he's one of the tribal leaders, an elder, and wealthy, and all of those things that go with it. And he says to Juwaybir, go to Ziyad ibn Labid and tell him that I have sent you, and that he is to marry you to his daughter Dhalfa. So Juwaybir, excited, feeling good from this pep talk that Rasulullah gave him, he goes to Ziyad ibn Labid and conveys the message. When he goes there and enters, he sees that Ziyad is with some of his tribes members, and there's a gathering there. So he asks very politely, he says, I have a message for Ziyad ibn Labid from Rasulullah. Would you like me to say it publicly, or will you step out and I'll tell you the message privately? So Ziyad, hearing that a message from Rasulullah has come, he feels very honored. And he says, no, this is an honor for me that Rasulullah has sent me a message. Please say it publicly so everyone can hear the message. So he feels a little bit of pride that Rasulullah has sent a personal message for me. So then Juwaybir tells him that this is the mission, this is the message that I've gotten from Rasulullah. You are commanded by him that you're supposed to give your daughter's hand in marriage to me. Ziyad's response is not exactly what you would think. He wasn't, outraged. He was a believer. He believed in Rasulullah. But his response is that it's not the way that we do things in our tribe. We only marry our youngsters to people from the same tribe, the same level of dignity and honor. So we look to marriages within our tribe. We don't marry to outsiders. So Juwaybir says, this is the message that I received. He says, that's fine, you go back to Rasulullah and I'll talk to him later. So Juwaybir leaves very dejected. He had gotten pumped up by Rasulullah, thinking this is a possibility, anything's possible. And then he sees that Ziyad ibn Labid isn't willing to honor the request or the command of Rasulullah. So he heads home. He heads back to the masjid. In the meantime, Dhalfa, who was in the home, who overheard, I think maybe in the olden days they would have, the men would be gathered, but then there would be holes for the women to hear from other places, or if they were behind, a screen or whatever, then they could also hear the conversation. They would eavesdrop, and they would also be part of the conversation, but from their own quarters. So Dhalfa comes out and she asks her father, what have you done? Rasulullah sent a message to you, and you sent the messenger away and said no? This is Ziyad ibn Labid. He's surprised that from his daughter's response, but he says, this isn't our custom in our tribe. We only marry to other people in our tribe. We don't marry to outsiders. She said, this is not right. You should go and speak to Rasulullah, and call Juwaybir back. Don't let him go back to Rasulullah with a refusal from you to obey Rasulullah. She speaks some sense into him. If he goes back to Rasulullah and says that Ziyad refused, then your standing with Rasulullah will be compromised. So quickly he sends someone after Juwaybir to stop him and says, wait here. And then Ziyad himself goes to Rasulullah and explains the situation to him before Juwaybir can come and complain. And he says that this is our custom in our tribe. I know you've sent someone to marry, but we're not used to this. Rasulullah again gives him the same message. He says that Islam has come to reset these standards of the Jahiliyyah. You might have had this custom before, but this is not a valid custom to hold on to now. Juwaybir is a mu'min. And he says, al-mu'min kufun lil-mu'mina. This word kufu, it's the same word that we use in kufuwan ahad at the end of Surah Al-Ikhlas. Allah has no kufu, He has no match. No one equal to Him. So the same word is used in a marriage context, where you were looking for a match for my son, a match for my daughter. Who is that match? Who is the kufu for my son and my daughter? So in Jahili standards, I have, they have to have this standard of living and from this socioeconomic class and from this race and speak this language and be Seyed or non-Seyed, or, I have all these standards that I want and that I think will be a kufu for my son or daughter. But Islam comes and resets that and says, al-mu'min kufun lil-mu'mina, wal-muslim kufun lil-muslima. What makes kafa'a, what makes that match between the boy and the girl is not those other Jahili standards, but it's iman. If you have a mu'min, then he is a match by virtue of his iman for a mu'mina. So with this talk, then Ziyad is convinced and he goes back. He finds Juwaybir, he takes him along with him, they go home, and he agrees to the match between Dhalfa and Juwaybir. All right, recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But that's not the end of the story. The couple, they get married and they have their marriage night, their wedding night, and from the beginning of the night, from Maghrib time until Fajr, Juwaybir goes into a corner of the room and he prays and recites Quran and spends his time in sajda and weeping. And Fajr time comes and he leaves, goes to Masjid Nabi and prays his prayer. Then he fasts that entire day. The wife, Dhalfa, she goes back to her parents and she says, I don't know what's happening. He totally ignored me. There's no, we're in the same room together, same house together, but there's no interaction between us. Let me also tell you this. How did they get into a house? So Juwaybir had nothing. He had no wealth. So even the bridal gift, the meher, instead of Juwaybir paying it to the father says it's on me, because Rasulullah has said marry him. So he takes on all the responsibility for the wedding, for the feast, for the meher. The father pays it to his daughter. And even for the home and the furnishing of the home, the father, the Ziyad ibn Labid, he provides all of that for the couple. Right? If you're wondering where does Juwaybir get a home when he has nothing to his name? So everything is from his father-in-law. The bride has brought everything, and Juwaybir has nothing to offer except his own character and the encouragement and the approval of Rasulullah, which accounts for a lot. But in that society, still with some of the Jahili standards still in place, it doesn't account for much. But it seems like the attitude of the in-laws is very positive and hopeful, and they think everything's fine. Dhalfa is also content with this wedding because Rasulullah himself has arranged it. But nothing happens that whole first night, the first day. Again, the second night, the same story. Juwayber spends the night in prayer. The third night also, and by that time the family and even Dhalfa is wondering what's happening. What kind of a marriage is this where there's no contact between husband and wife? So Dhalfa tells her father, and her father goes to Rasulullah and says, "This is the situation. We did everything you told us to do. We made this match. We even provided them with everything, but there's no, he's completely ignoring her and just spending all his time praying." So then Rasulullah goes to Juwayber and he talks to him. He says, what's the story? What's going on? Juwayber says that when I saw myself in this lavish home, everything is clean and smells good, and all the stuff that's provided for my beautiful wife, all these different things that are blessings for me, I was so overwhelmed with gratitude to Allah that I felt that I needed to first thank him. And so I started praying and reciting Quran to thank Allah, and then I got carried away and the whole night went, and it was Fajr time, and then I decided to fast to show thanks as well. So during the days I was fasting. So it was all out of gratitude to Allah for all these blessings that I've been showered with, that I spent these few nights in ibadah. But he says, I understand the requirements, the problems, and all these things, and so from tonight everything will be fine. And so then he goes and he's able to, have a normal life with his wife. But the piety of Juwayber comes out even on that wedding night, when you would think this is the last thing a person would think about is ibadah. He actually felt compelled to show his gratitude to Allah before he could have any sort of contact with his bride. Then the rest of the story, we don't know anything else about Juwayber or Dhalfa. Except that Juwayber ended up becoming Shaheed in one of the battles that Rasulullah waged against the Kuffar. So we know that he ended up as Shaheed, but we don't know any other details about him. This story is, I think, it's shocking, I think, in some ways for us. It's jarring, but it's very instructive. And it reflects the general teachings that Islam has. Now, many aspects of the marriage you might think are impractical, are maybe very unusual for our times. Maybe in those times they were different. And that's absolutely true. So cultural norms do change, and so even the idea of having a marriage that's arranged by elders, that is not obviously a very in vogue type of an idea now. And then the idea that you can marry across socioeconomic lines and to people who are so different from you and expect a healthy marriage, that also is something that we have to think about, whether it's really practical in all circumstances or there's some considerations that have to be taken. But there are some things that the story helps us to take out of our mind from the equation of marriage are really instructive, and those are universal. Those still hold for us. There are things that are Jahili customs and Jahili standards of what makes a boy and a girl a match that have no place in Islam. And we still hold on to those Jahili customs. Sometimes we think that Jahiliyyah was before Islam temporally, and once Islam came, then Jahiliyyah is over. But that's not the right way to think of Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah is not about before and after. Jahiliyyah is the standards and the norms of Jahiliyyah, which can persist even now in the time of Islam, even amongst Muslims. We can also suffer from aspects of Jahiliyyah as Muslims, as Shia. And so what we have to think of is, what are those remnants, those vestiges of Jahiliyyah that may still be in our thinking, and those we have to get rid of so that we can refine our own practice of Islam. So when it comes to marriage, one of the troubling trends that we have is that more and more our youth think that the way to find a match is through interaction and evaluating compatibility and attraction and these sorts of things. And they're very convinced when they're at that stage that I need to know him, I need to know her, we need to interact, we have to, talk a lot, we have to, interact a lot so that we can know what our ideas are, what the personalities are, whether we're compatible, and then even the ways of interacting and dating and these kinds of things that are in the society around us start to seem very positive, because that's a good way to get to know someone in a deeper way than simply knowing their family and their character and these kinds of things. The trouble with that is that the young person who's in the process of trying to get married, and not even only young person, even I've seen this with older people who try to get remarried after being widowed and after divorce. I think the person that's in that situation where they want to get married, they have so many blinders on them that they don't realize. Especially the young person doesn't even know yet what really makes for a successful marriage. And they'll think that personality compatibility is of the utmost importance. Or they'll think that physical attraction is of the utmost importance. Or they might be convinced by parents that, for instance, income or level of education or language and ethnic background, that these things are of utmost importance. And if those things are in place, then we can think about marriage. Just think about some of the requirements that are put in by society. If you have a boy who is shorter proposing to a girl who is taller, that's a no-go. That's a non-starter for many people. In reality, what effect does height of the boy and the girl play on the success of the marriage? I mean, obviously nothing at all. But that is oftentimes the age and height are some of the first things that people will ask about. And based on those two things, they will reject that, no, this person is too young or too old, or this person is too short or too tall, and therefore it's a no-go, a non-starter. What's important is for wise adults to weigh in and to help those young people to figure out what really is important. Those who have been married for a lifetime, you can hopefully attest to this. You can see in your own experience with your marriage or with the successful marriages around you that so many other things are crucial to the success of marriage, but these things that people think are important when they're young, they don't have any bearing on the success of the marriage or the failure of it. Attraction is a very simple one to rule out. Physical attraction is something you see the very most superficial part of the person, and you feel that this person is beautiful or handsome, they're good looking, and you know that's the reason why you want to pursue this person and get married to them. It's a reality of life that beauty fades, and it fades very quickly. Hadith also speak about this very with kind of brutal reality, and they say that if you're marrying for beauty, that beauty will fade. And it fades surprisingly quickly. And so if that is the standard, that's the reason why you're choosing your spouse, then obviously that's a very shaky ground to base any sort of meaningful relationship on, because it's only going to last for a very short amount of time. Not to mention the fact that it has it's not an indicator at all for anything within the person and the depth of their character. The beautiful person is not necessarily kinder or more devout or a better spouse, a better person. But the young person has a hard time seeing through that. They have blinders on them. So they need elders to step in and help them to realize that this is not the most important thing. This is not the standard that you should use for choosing a spouse. One, I think, challenge that this story presents to us is that we have very, very different people between Juwaybir and Dhalfa getting married. And we might think that there's no way this is a real story. How could this be possible for a nobody with all those social deficiencies, for him to marry a girl from a outstanding family, a wealthy family, totally opposite ends of the spectrum socioeconomically. In terms of looks, it seems like Dhalfa was very good looking and Juwaybir was just the opposite of that. And all those different, characteristics or those qualities, they are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. But what we see in the brief interaction that we get glimpses of through the hadith is that they both shared a devotion to Rasulullah. They both shared a deep piety. You see how Dhalfa even stands up to her father respectfully, but she stands up to her father when she sees that her father is going to refuse Rasulullah and reject his instructions when the instructions are about her. And put our own daughters in that circumstance. Someone comes as a suitor. Would she be tugging at the father and saying, how can you refuse? He's a believer. He has good character. How can you refuse? Or she would be pushing him out the door and saying, go away. I don't want anything to do with marriage. I don't want anything to do with you. But here, Dhalfa has the character to recognize that Rasulullah has made this match. It's his wish. And there must be wisdom that we may not be privy to, but we should obey and honor Rasulullah's admonishment. So that shows a deep level of commitment on her part to Rasulullah and to wanting to obey him. And then Juwaybir, we see his taqwa, the kind to spend 3 days in gratitude, in ibadah, to show gratitude to Allah for all these blessings that he's suddenly been thrown into the middle of without any work on his part, just by the dua of Rasulullah and the good wishes of the father of the bride. He is now steeped in worldly luxury, and he feels so grateful for all of the blessing that Allah has granted him. So you see great character in both of them. And in their particular instance, because both of them have this great character and devotion, their marriage is able to be successful, despite all of those very different aspects of their socioeconomic station and other worldly aspects. There's a lot more to say about marriage, but I think this is just one of those stories that I think we can hold up as a kind of a guiding light to question ourselves when we are guiding our own children into marriage, that we think about things that are actually important and be aware of those things that are superficial, that are not important, but that maybe society, maybe our culture, and maybe our hormones and these things are telling us are important. To have a wise head on your shoulders and to guide them through and say, look, these might be somewhere on the spectrum, but the most important things are values and character and goals in life, and these things are going to make you compatible with a spouse. It's not the superficial things that you think immediately are the most important. Allah, we ask you to shower your mercy and blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Help us, Allah, to follow in the footsteps of the companions of the Prophet and the Imams, and accept all of our deeds during this month of Ramadan, and forgive us for all of our sins. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Please recite aloud salawat for Maulana. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wajil farajahum. Just a couple of announcements again. Inshallah, on Friday night, ICZ Youth is hosting a family game night. We invite all of our community to be there, inshallah. There will be special games for kids aged 5 to 12, but there is an RSVP link for them so we can prepare accordingly. Today's program sponsors are Brother Atai and his family. Please recite a loud salawat for them. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Also, we have the books that Sheikh Rizwan has either authored or directed on panel outside. There are 6 books, so inshallah on your guys' way out, please do check them out. And that'll be all. But Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.